So let's start with the panel that is going to elaborate on how we aim to create the digital infrastructures of the future by means of bringing de facto standards and how FIWARE can help in creating this de facto standard. And we have a very nice panel of speakers. I think it's plenty of really top people. So let me introduce them very briefly, and then we go directly to the panel. So we have Greer, who is a senior manager in NIST of the CPS systems standards, and is driving all these activities under his organization that have to do with standardization and smart cities with the recently launched initiative by the White House. Chris will be able to elaborate on that later. Martin Brynskov, who is the chairman of the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative. We have been talking about that extensively during all these days. We have Steve Doyle from GSMA, technical director of the Connected Living program. Piva, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships in TM Forum. And finally, Joao that comes from the CEF Connecting Europe facility, and he's the lead architect of that initiative. So let me, Joao has to leave a little bit earlier, so we will ask to him some of the first questions. And indeed, let me start with you, Joao, about can you elaborate on the CEF initiative and how this started to the partnership with FIWARE being created, and how you envision this partnership evolve towards creation of de facto standards, particularly in the creation of cross-border digital services.
Good morning, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. We have started a partnership with FIWARE very recently. We come from the Connecting Europe facility, also known as CEF. We asked the question about FIWARE at our event. How many people knew FIWARE there? So I'm asking the same question. How many of you have heard about CEF? Just a simple show of hands. Okay, we are better here than we were in Brussels. Okay, so that's very good. I come from the government community, and one of the challenges that the government has, of course, is to interconnect the different member states. And that's what CEF is all about. It is about interconnecting the 28 member states in different domains. So we work with justice, healthcare, we work with social security, business registers, you name it. And all of them have similar needs when it comes to connectivity. So they need EID, they need e-signatures, they need to deliver documents in a safe way, not using just email. They need translation services, they need electronic invoicing. Okay? So we call in CEF all these things, what you call generic enablers, we call them building blocks. So the Connecting Europe facility has a number of building blocks that provides to the different domains, e-government projects, for them to use. And then they connect to hospitals in the healthcare domain, they connect to courts in the justice domain. So you can see it's really a lot of things happening in this period between 2014 and 2020. We managed around 1 billion euro, so the American billion, 100 millions. We give money directly to the implementers, so we have grants, and in the Commission we have services where we help people to implement the technology. And we thought it was a great idea to partner with FIWARE, because FIWARE provides the technology that can be used for people to quickly start experimenting with our generic enablers. So the first generic enabler that is on the FIWARE lab is called e-delivery. We gave yesterday a demo on e-delivery, and next year there will be grants for implementers of e-delivery, both from the private sector and from the public sector to use it or to have a product, meaning a software, that implements those standards. Because our idea is that all generic enablers must come from the industry standards, open industry standards, so that the private sector can play a role. And this is basically my message here today, is that we really need to have de facto standards, not only de jure, meaning things that are imposed, but mostly things that are used. And our, I would say, first key success factor in CEF is monitoring the take-up. And partnerships like this one and others are really important for us in basically the government 2.0, which is to have a dialogue with the private sector, with other initiatives, and to create an ecosystem like you are doing. And so we hope to see you using our generic enablers on the FIWARE lab and to increase basically the use of all these together, because by creating these partnerships, we create synergies and we can have this kind of network effect. And this is what we hope to see in the next years. Our website is called CEF Digital, and the grants are on the INEA website. But we have a news item on the FIWARE website and on our website, and you can always contact us in case you have any questions.
So now, Chris, the White House released end of September a communication where they announced this international coalition that NIST is leading and where the FIWARE Foundation is part of. Could you elaborate on the objectives of this coalition and how you envision this will be relevant in the creation of Defacto standards in the particular case of Smart Cities?
Sure, thank you, Juanjo. And good morning, everybody. The activity that you're talking about is the Internet of Things-enabled Smart City Framework. That's what we're calling it. That's IES City, and we picked that because IES in Italian is pronounced yes, and so it's Yes City framework that we're...
And in Spanish.
And in Spanish, so we're in good company in that case. As you said, FIWARE is a partner in this effort, and a very valued partner in this undertaking. We have other partners as well in the United States. The Telecommunications Industry Association is a partner along with ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, and the U.S. Green Building Council. In South Korea, the Ministry of Science, ICT, and Planning, MSIP, is a partner with us. And here in Europe, in addition to FIWARE, ETSI is a partner, the European Telecommunications Standards Institute, along with, in Italy, the Energy and Innovation Agency, ENEA. So we have a broad range of partners. The intention is to try to create international consensus about points of emerging harmonization in existing smart city architectures, deployments, and applications. So we have those three subgroups, a set of folks who are looking at applications today for smart cities and comparing them one to another. Another subgroup that's looking at architectures like FIWARE and other standards like 1M2M and MQTT and Centillo and others. And then finally a third group that's looking at existing smart city deployments, in particular those that are multi-infrastructure, like they cover energy and water and transportation, not just energy. And that are multi-technology, that is, they're implementing several different technologies and applications, so they're having to harmonize all of these things. And so the goal here, this is not a standards development effort, this is really a landscape mapping. We really just want to understand how people are solving the problem of harmonization today. And is there an emerging set of what we're calling pivotal points of interoperability, places where there's, in the technology, opportunities for harmonizing across these existing deployments and architectures. And so these pivotal points of interoperability might be a set of open APIs, right, that are commonly adopted. Might be something as simple as TLS 2 as the transport layer security, or IPv6 as the protocol, etc. And so what we're trying to do is develop a list of common solutions that are broadly used across all of these architectures and deployments so that we could identify points where we could harmonize across these architectures and where we might want to focus our standards efforts as well, because there's already an emerging consensus, and that's really the spirit of a de facto standard, right? Rather than creating one in an abstract context, rather looking at existing practice and where things are converging. The method that the group is using is to use the list of engineering concerns we developed with the Cyber Physical Systems Public Working Group. This public working group was an international effort. There were about 500 people who participated in that effort, including FIWARE folks, in identifying all of the engineering concerns that have to be addressed in the design and assurance of any Internet of Things application. And we have a list of about 173 such engineering concerns. And we're using this as the common language to map these various architectures and deployments. So I have this list of concerns, and we ask for example, the architecture owner, like FIWARE, can you tell us, does your architecture address this concern, and document that? Where is that concern addressed, and how is it addressed? We ask MQTT folks to do the same, 1M2M folks to do the same. And so all of these existing deployments and architectures are being mapped to a common list of engineering elements. And that allows us to directly compare them one to another, this solution in FIWARE is analogous to this solution in 1M2M, intended to address the same engineering component. And that allows us to compare across the entire landscape, identify these pivotal points of interoperability. The idea is that with enough points for harmonization, all of these architectures can be made to interact with one another while leaving room for innovation, points where they're not the same and address things in different ways, so that an application developer can look at the various architectures, see which one fits their needs best, and which one provides the best opportunity for harmonization. So the group got started with a launch in Washington, D.C., and also another European launch here in Rome back in April. There is a draft white paper that the group has prepared now, and they expect to complete that white paper and post it for public availability in June of the coming year. So we're looking forward to that. We think it's a real opportunity to better understand the landscape, how things might be harmonized amongst the existing technologies, and the opportunities that provides for focusing our efforts.
Thank you, Chris. And so now I want to turn to Carl. TM Forum and FIWARE Foundation recently announced during the Smart City Expo World Congress that they have signed an agreement about a joint collaboration program to grow the urban data economies, unleashing the potential of real-time open data. Could you elaborate on that collaboration, and how do you envision this could foster adoption of the de facto standards needed in smart cities?
Absolutely. Good morning again, everybody. Good to see that we're in Spain, so people will come in at roughly 11. So, first of all, I just wanted to say that approach that you just described, it's a very similar approach. I think you are doing a survey of the landscape, see in which direction is the marketplace moving. TM Forum is focused on, to some extent, shape that market, actually creating that de facto standard that will later become a standard and standardized by bodies like yourself that you represent. And incidentally, we were also part of that same White House press release as well. So we are connected in the same areas. When it comes to the collaboration model that we launched in a few weeks ago, it does cover a number of areas, and it will go over a couple of years. So the purpose here is to pull together the assets that are relevant from TM Forum and the assets that are relevant from FIWARE and help shape the market in a general direction. Incidentally, you will probably talk about it later on, Steve, there is a connection also to GSMA in this space. So the more we can pull these things together to provide a common set of directions, the easier it will be for the market to take this to heart, and the easier it will be to see what will actually emerge, and the easier it will be to standardize at the back end of this. So this model that we have pulled together, it includes a number of different components. It includes that we will pull our TM Forum open APIs. We call them the digital partnering APIs, the open APIs that we have in the forum, that have been already embraced by our community, and we have 950 organizations in TM Forum. So a group of influential communication providers, the Vodafones of the world, the Telefonicas, the China Mobiles, the AT&Ts, have already signed on the dotted line to actually enforce this with their supplier ecosystem. And we have a similar set of major world global ecosystem players like Ericsson, Huawei, and others who are in fact supporting it as well. So that way you can bridge the supply side and the demand side of an ecosystem. So what we're taking these digital partnering APIs that we know will be used and used by the larger community, and then we are pulling them together with the FIWARE open source stack. And the idea here is to be able to create not just a solution that can take information from a city and understand what the city is doing, but actually a solution that can drive a local data economy by being able to transacting digital content in a structured format and making it easy and for all players in that on both sides of that platform ecosystem. So in doing so, our ambition is to help cities who have an interest in not just using their city platforms as a way to enable transparency and openness in the city in general, but also as a way to unleash local innovation, increase the R&D, increase the R&D companies, get more taxpayer money in the end. That's really the ambition when it comes to creating this collaborative stream together. So we will be creating a joint shared API reference architecture. We will be creating white papers, vision documents, marketing materials, if you like. I think a lot of this will come down to how you sell it and how easy it will be to consume, right? Because if it's too hard, too complex, too involved, it will just be 5 minutes away from being a global success, right? So we need to get to the place where it's so easy that it's inevitable. And when we get to that place, then these things can be embraced. And my personal ambition is to drive this through into the forum to our membership, so that we are connecting the kind of global communications market in this effort as well. So that's a kind of a short little summary.
Thank you, Carl. Now to Martin. By definition, de facto standards have to do with level of adoption by the users in the case of the smart cities themselves. So, and that is somehow what the Open and Agile Smart Cities initiative was all about. So can you elaborate a little bit on the initiative? How do you see it playing a role in this adoption of de facto standards and recent news about the initiative?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to be here. Very honored to be among these guys. I mean, I think we try to do the same from different angles. And so I'm chairing the Open Agile Smart Cities initiative. It's now 104 cities, 22 countries. So I would say a diversity of voices from those who are going to use all this stuff in a market. And so the initiative grew out of a frustration that it was actually very difficult to find out how to put requirements to those who are going to build the cities in the digital transition. And well, it's still complex, but it's to have a strong voice from the demand side in there, which is really the core mission for the OASC. Then how do you do that? Well, being part of standards processes, trying to learn what is there, and then contribute where we can. We do this with ETSI, with other fora. Of course, we can go more into this. But also, actually, we try to understand how does, and I think you mentioned this, Carl, how do you connect the local requirements to these global dynamics, which is super difficult, because cities actually don't want a well-functioning global market. Well, they do because they want the choice of a global market, but they want, like you say, local economy. They want meaningful jobs locally, because otherwise you will get more Trump and Brexit, and people will hate technology. So actually, on the ground, it has a lot to do on how in practice. So what we're trying to do is to take the good examples, and indeed the FIWARE community has been, front-running this effort of seeing how can we do some generic stuff that works on the ground, and take the learnings and offer them to whatever fora are relevant, like the standards forum. So on the standard side, we can maybe come back to that, but it has not, let's say, traditionally been possible to shape the market from the traditional standards processes. It's so dynamic. It's driven on different logics than your standard development process. So it's also to understand how can we, as this complexity of voices, they don't agree. I mean, the cities, they compete and they actually have different viewpoints. So the question is also then, how can you bring this diversity into a relevant format? So we have a few instruments. We are part of projects. So I guess you heard maybe about the Synchronicity project, which is starting now, trying to create a global market for IoT-enabled urban services, focused on Europe, but with US, Mexico, Korea, Brazil, and so on in there. We have a working group on mobility. We have a working group on standards, one on architecture. So trying to build this together, but in effect, try to converge the local perspective and feed it out where it makes a difference. And actually, the cities don't care. They just want good solutions that they can buy easily with the local contribution for the economy. And when that's done, like you say, 5 minutes away, it's a huge success. But getting that complexity into a usable format requires some work. And I think we have, these years, we're doing this effort. We're working with the MetroLab network. So Ben, our guys met him in DC yesterday. He's coming to our conference on the 12th of January. We have the newly established Seoul Digital Foundation, right? Seoul also tried to pivot what they did in terms of technology, because it didn't really seem to create the business, the social change and so on that technology alone could do. So we try to bring these voices together, like you do here. So of course I would welcome everyone to be part of this conversation, and certainly we are contributing and will continue to do so in the other streams that are running, because they are somehow connected.
Thank you. Before coming to you, Steve, I would like to ask another question to Joao before he may have to rush and leave. Because Joao, you represent the European Commission somehow here. So I would like to hear what do you feel could be the role of public administrations in pushing de facto standards? And is something where you envision that the European Commission, for instance, may play a role and help these emerging de facto standards to get consolidated?
Yeah, well, basically, the European Commission, in different sectors, and also in this kind of umbrella regulation that is called EIDAS, I don't know if you are aware, has to rely on standards to give a playing field to the 28 member states. So that's clear. When you have an initiative that involves the 28 member states, you have somehow to agree to reach a consensus on doing that thing in a similar way. Okay? So all our projects somehow they have to rely on a consensus building process where you have many distinct opinions and you have also legacy. And this is basically, I would say, one of the main challenges is that, as you know, the beauty of standards is that there are many to choose from. And the standardization process happens at many levels. So you have standards coming from ISO and from the international standardization organizations, the European standard bodies, and then you have fora as well, forum. One of the initiatives that we are currently carrying out, mainly in DG Connect, for example, is to create a catalog of standards that help public administrations to procure solutions based on standards, instead of procuring them based on brands or based on specific products. So one of the main objectives also of the Commission is to avoid the lock-in of public administrations and to promote common ways of doing the same thing so that you get interoperability on top of solving your own local problem. And I think this is also what we want, all of us, is that you're trying to solve your problem and you create barriers to all the others. So you solve one problem and you create like 27, something like this, right? So more and more what we see is that technology obliges everyone to think one step further. Because the cost of investing in something, of creating something, right, will then be, let's say, postponed also to the future because you have to maintain that and that will become legacy. So it's very important to design things having in mind that the future is interconnection and you need to rely on these standards. So one of the initiatives, definitely the catalog of standards that is coming through. We have the Connecting Your Facility. As I said, we always rely on standards. Many of them are not de jure. Many of them come from the ground, come from the use, so Defacto Standards. And finally, I would say also the IES regulation. Many of the trust services, they will rely on a list of standards that will come from the regulation, so standards from the international standardization bodies and the European standardization bodies. But still, even if they are more, let's say, formal standards, they will help e-signatures to work across borders. They will help EID to work across borders. So this is a reality already today, and I really welcome, by the way, the different initiatives around this table, because what we want to reach is a consensus in the end of the day, and to ensure that we don't create barriers to the digital market, basically. And we create a digital single market, and that's our common objective. And we start with cities, but then we go to regions, member states, and Europe as a whole, and then the globe, which is also more and more the case. I mean, many times we see that projects, and EL, for example, is one of them, wants then to communicate also across different continents. So that's the next step. I think much is happening. We don't have time to go in detail, but I give you an idea of what we are trying to do.
Okay, thank you. Now, Steve and GSMA, how do you see, how can you explain that GSMA positions itself in front of Defacto standards? What is the role that the organization is aiming at? And could you elaborate on particularly the IoT-enabled big data ecosystem project that where FIWARE is involved?
Thank you. So for those who don't know, GSMA is the trade body representing 800 mobile network operators worldwide. So I am sure that all of you in the audience are actually helped by the work that GSMA does one way or another. We have obviously Telefonica and Orange, but other operators and associate companies that are part of the GSMA. We do a lot of work with a wide range of standards bodies. We work with ETSI and have done for decades. And what we know of the work that's done there is it's absolutely vitally important to make sure that mobile networks interoperate and there's choice between what happens in handsets and networks, and your network will work with any handset that's on the market. So there's a whole rigorous process of use of formal standards. Of course, that takes a long time, and it's important, but the timescales for each of those standards is maybe 5 years. If you look at now, we're talking about 5G, but mobile networks were started in the early 90s, so every generation of mobile takes takes a good 5 years to go through the standards process. And that's essential for what the mobile networks are, but that's certainly not fast enough for what happens in the IT innovation areas in smart cities. So I think one of the most important parts about this is the agility that comes out of de facto standards. And so we see that initiatives like FIWARE are really important because the fact that those standards can be evolved through the practice of using the standard, seeing where it works well, seeing where there could be some improvements, being able to feedback and iterate very, very quickly means that there's a significant advantage to be gained for the future. And whilst we are looking at these de facto standards, we also have an eye on eventually feeding through to more formal standards bodies. That's been done with one of the initiatives we work on which we call Mobile Connect, which is an identity solution. That's also connected with the IDAS work as well. We work there with the OpenID Foundation, which is, I think, similar in concept to the FIWARE Foundation now. So the work there is to feed in from the implementations of our work, which is going on IoT big data. We work with Telefonica and FIWARE. We give ideas on the use cases that we're trying to solve, the practice of what we find. We would then work both directly between GSMA and also our operator members and other members to FIWARE. And somewhere in the future, some of this might become IEEE standards, possibly. It may be W3C standards or schema.org. So all of these things we see as possible, but we don't want to hold up the process by going through the long iterative cycle that happens with some of these standards. And the other side of this, and we have seen standards which have been created, which everyone has been very diligent about trying to create the best practice that they can, but the standard never gets adopted. And I could list any number of these that we know they're great standards, but they're not used. And I think then you question it as to really what's the value in a standard that never gets used. It is much better to be trying something, using it, and seeing in what areas can you improve that for the future. So I think that's where we welcome, in particular, FIWARE, the fact that it's driven based on actual deployments. There's for us, and what we are doing with IoT Big Data is to establish a common framework that can be used for taking IoT data from a variety of sources, then being able to wrap around that in big data analytics, visualization, and machine learning. So the NGSI v2 interface is a key component of that. It's the way that we see data coming into and out of the platform. It will work with things like 1M2M as well. So we can definitely get the data into the platforms, process it, put security controls on it. So it's all very good and very flexible. It's a great universal interface for getting data in and out of platforms. And so then the other side of what we are seeing as important is harmonized data models, and that is I think important. We've been looking towards an air quality study in the UK, and there's open data everywhere. There's open data. In the UK, there's a website run by the government, which is the Open Data website. If you search for environmental data, you find 13,000 plus results, and those are individual cities that have exposed certain data in their own ways. You will see some of it is rendered graphically, some as CSV files, some APIs, Excel spreadsheets, the whole variety of things. And once you start to dig, that field names are different between different cities, and the units are different. We have, aside from the lat long long positions as well. We have our own grid system in the UK, so some of the data will be in the UK's grid system rather than lat long, and some will be lat long. And there's all of this problem of if you're you can do things in a single city context, and you'll see that the pilots will work really well. We want, and it may be because of our focus being global, but we want to see opportunities for national applications to work successfully, regional applications and global applications. And for that, we see that it's the combination really of harmonized data models plus also a standardized API. So that's where FIWARE and the activities in FIWARE work really well for us.
All right, thank you, Steve. So let us start with some questions for the whole panel, and you take it, and we can run an active dynamic dialogue. And one of these questions has been mentioned somehow, is this approach about implementation driven versus design by committee, which is the kind of the standard way of standards. What's your vision and about that? You want to take that, Carl?
Yeah, I would like to maybe change the name from standard way of doing standards to the dying way of doing standards, perhaps. Because I do think more and more it will become de facto driven. More and more it will be in the agile sense. Simply because there are too many things happening in parallel, and there's simply no way of predicting the future if you sit in a closed committee. You can absolutely harness the power of what's going on in the world and pull together the strings. This concept of finding the proper interoperability points is absolutely the right one. And once you are able to do that, and if you have, if you represent the right organization, then you can actually pull it together and do it like that. So I think the future is all about driven by implementation rather than by committee.
Anyone wants to say anything? That would certainly be the perspective from the city side as well, because I mean they don't care about standards that aren't connected to a market. So as soon as something is proven and there's a market around it, it works. But a standards as such doesn't give any value from a city's perspective. There's no, I mean, it is a market. And of course, the choice, the avoidance of vendor lock-in is a key thing, but also the comparability. I mean, to actually have harmonized data that you can work with. And it's interesting to see now increasingly many of these initiatives are operated by cities. So I think in many ways cities are the catalyst domain for much of this complexity, because they need solutions. I mean, it can be academic to go across verticals if you're a vertical. Of course, you can have the need for interoperability if you do, let's say, water metering. You need somehow to link up and so on. But for a city that has to manage, thousands of systems or hundreds of systems, it's a need. So what you see in Denmark, for instance, the Open Data Denmark portal is run by the cities, mandated by government and funded, co-funded. And that is, I think, the cities are becoming drivers of much of this de facto stuff. And then, the experiences go down the verticals and up into the market and framing. And of course, the cities are, let's say, I'm generalizing a lot, but actually the cities are not very comfortable with this role, because cities were not made to create markets. They were made to create nice, let's say, cities and opportunities. So even there's a learning curve for them how to operate in this space. So this is very much the perspective from OASC. How can we together formulate something that actually grows out from the cities, but also releases them from the roles of creating standards, because actually they're paid to make cities.
Super quickly make just another comment on what you said, which I agree with. When we talk to cities, we find that they don't want to hand over their future to global enterprises. They don't want to be driven by a roadmap in New York or somewhere else. But what they do want are hardened, good solutions that are work, fuss-free, no problem. They want to see repeatable success elsewhere. So if the FIWARE community can come up with a model whereby allowing cities to get access to something that is stable, works, can be operated on a local level, or at least be curated by somebody on a local level, that the whole ecosystem can be actually locally managed, perhaps providing a syndicated marketplace where the city can choose and pick what solutions it wishes to deploy from this what we just viewed here before with the marketplace development. Then I think that's a nice spot to be in for FIWARE, because then it can combine sort of a global hardened approach with a very local usage and curated model.
So, Juanjo, there are really two risks associated with standards by committee. The one we've already talked about is this business of timeliness. In the IT world, that's an important factor. The other risk to committee-driven, top-down approach is over-standardization. So if you standardize everything, you freeze out innovation and entrepreneurship. If you standardize nothing, you get chaos, right? And so there's a right level of standardization that enables interaction as a platform for innovation and entrepreneurship. And the trick, of course, is finding that right level. And the best way to do that, I think, is this bottom-up approach, industry-led, consensus-based standards that emerge from best practices and what you're calling de facto approaches. And so I think those two things mean that, as you said, the standard by committee process is dying. I think the important role that government can play is as convener, right? To provide a neutral environment in which industry can interact and help to determine what is the right level of standard, what standards are critical to the market to enable it to grow, but not to inhibit it to grow. So I think we keep those two things in mind, timeliness and just the right level of standards, and also government as convener. That's been our approach to this area.
And what could be the role of open source in that aspect? I guess if we are talking about implementation-driven, this could be actually helpful. What's your vision?
So we see, we're very interested in open source. We know that actually a lot of the core of the telco networks isn't, but in terms of more in the application space, we really do believe very, very significantly in open source. We think that increasingly it provides transparency to know what's happening, and even if the source code itself is never modified, we see that just the transparency in the code so that someone can understand what's happening in the component that I'm using becomes really important. And I think there's perceptions of there could be backdoors in proprietary systems, that you never know what's happening, and open source makes sure that you can understand what's going on there. We also see that's vitally important for things like security and the fact that there are so many people who are able to look and potentially improve on the code that's being used within the stack is vital. And I think so we're seeing some of this with IoT devices at the moment, where there are significant hacks that are going on, and it is, I think, going to be more important in the future that there's the ability to fix those problems quickly, more agilely, and open source in the IoT space will be very, very important, I believe. The platforms itself, I think, we see from the GSMA side that we can take the FIWARE stack. We can combine some other components as well with that from the open source community. It's giving much more flexibility, avoiding vendor lock-in, all the things that we like to try and achieve within the GSMA is enabled by open source. And we're committed to it as well. So the things that we're working on, and we have Mobile Connect, which we have released SDKs for. We make those available open source. We're committed to the work that we do with the IoT big data, where GSMA is producing any assets. We will make those available open source as well, to improve the overall community. Because yeah, and it's what our role really is around growing the overall use of mobile networks. So we are interested in boosting the ecosystem, and we see that open source is a really important way of achieving that.
And another perspective on open source, I think it's a good way to rebalance power between global giants and the community. With open source, it does provide a more of a just playing ground for companies. This notion that open source might be worse quality-wise, I mean that died ages ago. We all know that open source is actually, if anything, usually better quality because it has more eyes on it. I think perhaps more important though than open source for this purpose of standardization is having open APIs that we can actually standardize. Open APIs will be the key to doing this right. Open APIs and underpinning information models behind them.
I think it's crucial, yes, the open APIs, and actually also what you say, keeping innovation possibilities open. So the role of standards here is to have a standardized ways to muck around, and then you can actually do something that delivers services and in a scalable way, right? So you want the experimental layer to connect to the pre-commercial, to connect to the operations, and back and forth. Actually, you want hackable cities or hackable systems in the sense that it can be adapted. Because otherwise you get frozen systems and you don't, I mean, it's not agile, it doesn't move us ahead with the possibilities. So I think really it's, I mean, getting something to work in a standardized way on a global sense and not being able to touch it is sub-optimizing because we miss the innovation potentials that are coming out of the front-runner initiatives.
I think the really important characteristic is transparency. And that transparency can be created in a lot of ways. Certainly open source is one way, and I think a very effective way, as you pointed out. Nonetheless, a lot of de facto standards can emerge from proprietary processes, and in many cases, those are very well developed. And so in the world of de facto standards, they may emerge in a wide variety of paths. It's just important that for broad adoption and for promoting its use for innovation, to drive growth, to create opportunities, that you create that transparency, and that's a key factor. So I think FIWARE is doing the right thing in trying to be entirely transparent about the platform.
Thank you. One question is, do you envision that this trend towards de facto standards versus the jure standards is something that is developing the same way worldwide, or are there specifics in Asia that are doing differently, or in the US? Could you elaborate on you are very connected to some initiatives in Asia, so and you as well. So, well, it's an open question to the floor.
Isn't that a great question? Yeah, surprisingly, I would say it's in the same ways that digital transformation makes the user experience converge in all places in the world where you can connect the same concept. Yeah, I would say it's fairly similar. Yeah.
I would say the dynamics are quite different, but the needs are the same. Visiting China and realizing the scale and the need for governance, that is really driving a need for standards. But it's, even though there are some mechanisms in place that sometimes you envy in terms of driving development, actually it's being hindered by the lack of standards. So I see the Chinese market and governments looking for that.
If you look at some of the players that work outside of China, coming from China, I would argue that most of them have embraced open source, open standards, open APIs more than perhaps some of the companies in the Western world. I was at Huawei is a good example, but there are many more.
But I still think it's quite fragmented. I mean, in terms of who can build. I have a city perspective, so there are 10 companies in China who can build a city end to end. and they don't have interoperability there. Trust me. I mean, some of the providers do have, but
This is it's very true. This is actually why we have just released an innovation center in one of the 200 smart city pilot cities in China with FIWARE, and hopefully we can add them to the list of OASC cities as well. So I think you're quite right when it comes to. But they do have an amazing capability of driving things top down. They have a very strong top down approach. Still not entirely open however, product houses in China deliver solutions that are smart city innovation projects in China doesn't necessarily do so. I think so that there's a bit of a discrepancy maybe in this model.
But I think it's really interesting to see, and maybe you can comment as well, the way that the different continents inspire each other. So reading the Obama announcement or year and a half ago and so on. There's a lot of, let's say, rhetoric around it that sounded very European, in fact, that I had not seen before in some of these initiatives. And so I think there's a fruitful inspiration. We're in a phase where nobody has sort of grokked it, but it's a really, we're shaping this global market together, and I think that's a very fruitful situation to have, consensus-based.
Yeah, I certainly agree that international cooperation is key to success. I think we're all striving to figure out what the secret is to that cooperation. Smart cities is a complex landscape. As you all pointed out, the solutions are very local, and nonetheless the technologies are highly global. And so bridging that divide is a key issue. I don't want to speak to the issue of Asia, but U.S. policy is for voluntary consensus, industry-led standards processes, and that's been our focus throughout our smart cities effort.
So let's now conclude with a final statement. I would like to hear from each of you. So maybe starting with Carl, and then Joao cannot make a final statement. That's an issue, but okay.
Yeah, no, so I suppose my final statement would be around encouraging FIWARE to move a little bit from being the sort of company where you would do interesting things in the lab to becoming slightly more consumable in the a little bit more app store-like in the way that this innovation is being brought to cities. And I think that will help drive the Defacto Standards process as well, because Defacto Standards, after all, are all a consequence of being adopted by many leading organizations, whether they are cities or companies. So, and I think all the ingredients are there. I think it's more a matter now of being more consumable in the eyes of the buyers. And when we get to that place, that will accelerate the Defacto Standards building around this space, and we will certainly try to help.
Thank
you. I think from our perspective, the work that's been done so far on the technical standards is absolutely excellent. The important part is clearly to achieve scale, and I think the announcement with the marketplace and the changes there, and just the more ability to scale this commercially is a great step forward as well. From the cities, this may be a UK perspective, but we see a lack of good cooperation between cities and learning of the best practice and then sharing that. And so I'd hope that through FIWARE and the fact that this becomes more of here's a standard solution based on some off-the-shelf capabilities that will help you build the smart cities, that there'll be more exchange of that best practice and not so much reinventing the wheel that goes on, more common APIs, more harmonized data models. But this is a really important foundation for that. So the fact that there is a technology stack which enables this, that is open source, that is used globally, and proves that you can really scale smart cities, I think is absolutely vital for the future.
It's interesting that you should mention the fragmentation of the UK. It's the only place where we actually pay by the FIFA rules, because the member state rule didn't apply because Scotland and England, they were separate. And the Scottish cities are working very much together, and the English cities not so much. It's really interesting. Now, I would agree that we sit on a tinderbox, and we're just on the verge of many vertical solutions having the need for horizontal interoperability from a commercial-driven perspective. And now the cities will be key in formulating this, so I really hope that, also like you say, creating actual markets and showing then what are the, let's say, guiding lines that we should put into those principles or de facto standards as they're emerging are key in this next couple of years. And we're happy to be contributing to that through the Synchronicity large-scale pilot. And I invite everyone to join and to give critique and to let's help this become a success, because it has to be market-driven, but with a strong voice from, let's say, the communities.
I guess my final comments would be that FIWARE is at kind of an interesting moment of opportunity. Right? There's a lot of investment that's been made, a whole lot of work that's been done. There's a real opportunity, I think, illustrated by the FIWARE Mundus panel yesterday, right? Representation from really around the world with interest in this. But it's going to be important for the folks involved in FIWARE to recognize that international perspective is different from the perspective you've had prior to this point. You've had a real Eurocentric view of this. In order to be successful on the global stage, right? First, you have to recognize that those outside are going to view this as a starting point, not an ending point, right? That's a very different perspective. The second implication of a starting point is that, to some degree, and this is always a challenge, you have to let it go, right? Let it evolve so that it meets the broader range of constituents and stakeholders, if it's to be a truly international platform. That's a big change, a big step. It's sort of contrary to all of the things that you've done and the way you've been thinking about things so far. And so it's a moment of opportunity, a moment of transition, and a real challenge for FIWARE. So looking forward to seeing how that evolves over time.
All right. Okay, so with this, we conclude. Thank you for the panelists. And I think